can remember saying distinctly, what a beautiful day this started off to be, and it descended into hell on earth.
September 11th, 2001. It started like any other early fall day. In New York City, it was bright, sunny, and the sky was clear. As people rushed to work, got ready for school, and began their day, no one could imagine how suddenly and violently the world was about to change. And then, at 8:46 a.m., a United Airlines flight originating from Boston en route to LA, with 65 people on board, crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At first, the world only thought it was a horrific accident, but then, less than a half hour later, a second airliner, American Flight 77 from Dulles to LA, crashed into the South Tower. America was under attack. In total, nearly 3,000 innocent men, women, and children's lives were claimed on that horrible day. Nobody could have predicted that this could happen. Or could they have? To understand the devastation of 9/11, we need to go back over 100 years to the world during World War I. In 1914, the world was at war. Great Britain, France, and Russia, known as the Allied powers, were fighting against Germany, the Australian, Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, also known as the Central Powers. Quickly, the war reached a stalemate, and Great Britain was losing money, and the loss of life was tremendous. They needed to find a way to win, so they turned to the people of Palestine. Great Britain knew if they could take the Ottoman Empire out of the war, it would help them tremendously. They made a deal with the Palestinians that if they rebelled against and defeated the Ottomans, they could have their own country. However, Great Britain realized this would not be enough, so they then approached the Jews of Europe and told them if they helped them produce weapons for Britain, then they would get their own country. The only problem with this is, unbeknownst to both groups, they had been promised the same land. By 1918, the war was over. Great Britain was victorious and created Iraq and Palestine as countries from the remnants of the empire. Britain knew eventually these countries would want to rebel against them, so they intentionally put groups of people who hated each other in the same land, so that they'd be too busy hating each other to hate Britain. However, Britain never could have predicted the effect this would cause on the Middle East in the future. In the years 1918 to 1948, Jews from Europe immigrated to Palestine to what they thought was their new home. However, when the Palestinians saw them arriving, they got upset and complained to Britain. Britain then blocked almost all Jews from traveling there, and the remaining millions who weren't able to leave Europe were stuck in Europe during the Holocaust. Over 6 million innocent Jews who could have been living in Palestine perished during this terrible time. After the Holocaust and World War II ended, many Jews had nowhere to go. Their houses had either been destroyed or other families had moved in and refused to leave. The United Nations and the U.S. knew after the horrors that had happened to these people, they couldn't remain in Europe. So in 1948, the UN created the country Israel. This angered the Palestinians because they felt they were being punished for something the Germans did a whole continent away. So almost immediately after being created, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq all attacked Israel. However, despite being newly created and outnumbered, Israel was much more organized and had support from Western countries such as the U.S., and they won. Although Israel won, the hatred never left. About 20 years later, the same Arab countries, still angered at Israel, organized themselves and attacked again. they didn't stand a chance. Israel, with its superior technology and organization, beat them in less than a week and even took more land for themselves. The war was named the Six-Day War and was an extreme embarrassment for the Arab countries. Many Muslim extremists realized that through regular warfare, they could not defeat Israel. Realizing this, they resorted to terrorism, which meant hijacking planes, suicide bombers, and attacks that Israel wasn't ready for. The U.S., however, was against all the violence in the area. So, in 1978, September 10th to the 13th, the Camp David Accords were made, which officially made peace in the region. However, the Muslim extremists were extremely angered by this. One of these extremists' names was Osama bin Laden. Extremists such as bin Laden started to try and plot attacks on America, but soon something else took their attention. The two superpowers of the world during the 70s were the Soviet Union and America. The Soviet Union was a communist state and wanted to spread communism, so in 1979 they invaded Afghanistan. All the Muslim extremists immediately forgot about America and rushed to Afghanistan to fight. They formed a group called Mujahideen and started preparing. The U.S. hated the Soviet Union, so they gladly gave billions of dollars and weapons to the Mujahideen to fight the Soviet Union. Even though the Soviet Union was a superpower, their large tanks and weapons were not made for the hilly terrain. The Mujahideen launched guerrilla attacks, and in 1988, the Soviets pulled out. The Mujahideen, despite having billions of dollars from America, believed their God Allah had helped them win, and they thought they could defeat anyone. To add on to this issue, only 1 year later, the Soviet Union broke apart, and the Mujahideen thought they had destroyed a superpower. The Mujahideen, then with billions of dollars and weapons given from the U.S., split into two groups. The Taliban were responsible for running the government of Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda, who were responsible for worldwide recruitment. Osama bin Laden, now in Al-Qaeda, had three main reasons for hating America and ultimately masterminding 9/11. The first reason started only a year later. His major reason began in 1990, when Iraq invaded a small country called Kuwait, because they desperately needed money, and Kuwait controlled a great deal of oil for them to sell. They then further threatened to invade Saudi Arabia, who controlled 25% of the oil in the world. The U.S. was aware of this and frantically tried to stop Iraq from doing this by putting trade sanctions on them and bombing them. This made bin Laden very angry because the sanctions were killing millions of innocent Muslims. When Iraq still wasn't backing down, Saudi Arabia begged the U.S. to bring in troops. This made bin Laden even angrier because he thought since their Mujahideen had defeated the Soviet Union, they should have been asked to fight, not America. What made him even angrier, if possible, is where the U.S. troops were stationed. The U.S. had put troops near Mecca and Medina, which are the two holiest Muslim cities. Bin Laden considered this a direct attack on Islam and was very offended. In 1991, Iraq invaded and American forces had an easy time stopping them. Bin Laden now hated America more than ever and vowed to destroy it. These three reasons, U.S. occupation of Saudi Arabia, U.S. support with Israel, and U.S. sanctions on Iraq, are the three major reasons why Osama bin Laden orchestrated 9/11. But 9/11 wasn't the first terrorist act Al-Qaeda perpetrated against America. In 1993, a van full of bombs exploded underneath the World Trade Center in New York. The goal was to have one tower collapse onto the other, but luckily there weren't enough explosives. Al-Qaeda immediately took responsibility for the bombing, and a man named Ramzi Youssef was arrested for the bombing. To add on to the horror of this attack, as Youssef was in custody, being brought to prison, he stated, "Next time, they're going down," referring to the towers. Around 1993 and 1994, the African country of Somalia was in extreme famine, and thousands of people were dying. The U.S. and UN dropped food into towns, but local warlords would steal the food and use it to exploit the people. People were still starving, so America sent in ground support to distribute the food to people and stop the warlords. Al-Qaeda, however, saw a chance to attack Americans, armed local warlords, and attacked. In October of 1993, an American Black Hawk helicopter was shot down, and 19 troops died in the rescue efforts. The U.S. had no choice but to pull out of Somalia after this tragic event. Al-Qaeda saw this as a victory and thought the USA wasn't that powerful and were like paper tigers. They looked tough on the outside, but in reality, they are weak as paper. In 1998, Al-Qaeda struck again and bombed the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. If a U.S. embassy is attacked, this is the equivalent of invading America because it is U.S. territory. Over 220 innocent Africans and Americans who had done nothing to deserve this attack were killed, and Al-Qaeda immediately took credit for this tragic attack. In 2000, only 2 years after the embassy attacks, a boat full of explosives and suicide bombers paddled up to a U.S. Navy ship refueling off the coast of Yemen. The soldiers were not allowed to shoot them because they were ordered not to shoot unless shot at. 17 soldiers died from the attack, and Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility once again. The tragic attack that would stay in every American's hearts and minds for years to come took place on September 11th, 2001. 2 planes hijacked by members of Al-Qaeda flew into the World Trade Center, one into the Pentagon, and one was destined for the White House. The terrorists of Al-Qaeda attacked these sites for a reason. The World Trade Center represented America's economic power in the world. The Pentagon represented America's military power in the world. And lastly, the White House, which, thanks to the actions of heroic citizens, did not get destroyed, represented America's political power and the spread of democracy. The plane that was intended for the White House was taken over by heroic passengers who sacrificed their lives to save others and crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. However, this was not the last attack. In December of 2001, a man named Richard Reed tried to blow up a plane with bombs in his shoe. 5 years later, in 2006, there was a plot to blow up 10 planes with liquid inside of drinks. Luckily, the plot was foiled beforehand. Finally, in 2009, Umar Abu-Dmadalab tried to blow up a plane with bombs in his underwear. These attacks explain why we have to take off our shoes, why we can't go through security with drinks, and why we have to go through full body scanners. Besides the death and destruction, the horrific attack on 9/11 had even more devastating effects. After the attack, nobody would fly on planes, and the airplane industry almost crashed. the U.S. government had to spend billions of dollars to bail them out, and additional billions to tighten airplane security. 9/11 ultimately contributed to an economic recession that occurred from 2001 to 2003. And even after it ended, the economy was still damaged. After the attacks, people would stereotype Muslims with terrorism, even though most Muslims are peaceful. The Patriot Act was created to ensure the police could notify the FBI and CIA about suspicious activities. For example, one of the hijackers took flying lessons on taking off and flying, but was not interested in landing. If the police had been able to notify the FBI about this, they may have been able to stop the attacks. 9/11 also caused a war on terror. America invaded Afghanistan in 2001 and tried to set up a democracy there. In 2012, the U.S. killed Osama bin Laden, marking a major victory in the war on terror. Another war, the Iraq War, started because of 9/11. The U.S. thought Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, had weapons of mass destruction. They invaded to remove him from power and have been trying to install a democracy ever since. Finally, our war on the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, also known as ISIS, resulted from 9/11. When Al-Qaeda tried to attack American troops in Iraq and also attack the Syrian government, they eventually broke off and formed a group called ISIS, who we are fighting today. Despite the fact that we lost a few thousand innocent citizens, random strangers put their differences aside, no matter the race, the religion, or beliefs, and came together to help each other. Our country grew together as a whole. Now every year on September 11th, we come together to remember the mothers, fathers, uncles, sisters, brothers, and many other friends and family that lost their lives on that dreadful day. We remember the volunteers, the heroes such as the firemen, police, and even random citizens who sacrificed their own lives to help others live theirs. Now, because of these men and women, we can proudly say, God bless America.
See everything happening to me if it was that day all over again. You never lose the sounds, the sights, the taste of everything that happened.